Start the clock.
Good afternoon. At the tone, time will be
Real time.
On March 13th, 2013, writer and journalist Jay Gilsig posted an op-ed piece on CFN titled, Bill 14, I'm boycotting Quebec until after Labor Day. Are you? You can view this article at this link. Within this op-ed piece, Mr. Gilsig asks the question, why is it that the federal government remains so silent on what's happening to Canadians living in Quebec that don't subscribe to the provincially mandated madness? And why are they abdicating those citizens' rights? I decided to share my response to Mr. Gilsig's question with all of you as the topic of today's rant. So in response to this question being asked, I offer two possible likely reasons. Number one, the infiltration of federal government at this time in Canada's history with francophones who side with and feel a solidarity to the provincial government of Quebec on many issues. Something that is clearly spelled out by Danny Williams in this interview, where he basically comes flat out and warns Canadian citizens in no uncertain terms that Canadians are being swindled.
You talk about it having tax breaks for the best child care programs in the country, the lowest tuition for post-secondary. You know, it seems to me you're saying, look, you guys are basically subsidizing the best stuff for your citizens at the expense of the rest of the Canadians.
I've gone further than that. I said the tail is wagging the dog.
He goes further and says that he has no doubt that there's a conspiracy by the French to undermine Canada's integrity.
I talked today about the political strangulation that's going on in this country. Because Quebec has basically surrounded Ottawa through its federal ministers, French ministers, its provincial government, and the Bloc Québécois, they have the federal government strangled. So as a result, whatever their demands are, they get. So we have a situation here whereby they're taking exorbitant profits from Newfoundland and Labrador. They're preventing Ontario and the Atlantic provinces from getting an economic advantage and moving ahead economically. And at the same time, turning around and going back to those same provinces like Ontario and saying, would you mind giving me $17 billion a year so I can lower my taxes, so I can subsidize my electricity rates to the tune of $7 billion? Electricity rates in Quebec are 40% lower than Toronto, Calgary, Moncton, and Halifax.
But listen to me, that's hot stuff. When you're saying the French ministers in Ontario, in Ottawa,
Absolutely.
are working on behalf of Quebec, not on behalf of the rest of Canada?
Absolutely. This is where you get the perfect political trifecta.
Like who? I mean, I understand the Bloc, but you're talking about federal ministers?
Absolutely. The federal government, any federal government, whether it happens to be a conservative government or a liberal government, the Quebec interests are represented by those federal ministers. If they can't get the job done, the Quebec provincial government steps in and exerts its pressure. If they can't get the job done, the Bloc Québécois, who have the balance of power in Canada, then use their own
Premier,
interests.
every MP represents the region and the riding. We get that, but you seem to be suggesting there's something deeper, that all politicians from Quebec are simply, essentially, Quebec first at the expense of the rest of the country. That, you really believe that?
I actually believe that. Yeah, I'm not suggesting that. I'm actually saying it. What I'm saying to you is that as a result of the political strategy which Quebec has, which is a smart political strategy, but it's to the detriment of the rest of Canada. Everybody knows that Quebec gets preferential treatment in this country.
He also says that Quebec is using underhanded tactics.
They came back after 4 years of stalling us and delaying us and gave the most blatantly biased decision that I've seen in 40 years of being a lawyer. I haven't practiced law for 40 years. I've practiced for 30. Unbelievable. Ignoring facts, suppressing evidence that was relevant, reversing previous decisions, ignoring principles of administrative law and common law. I've never seen anything like it, but it was deliberately to stop us, delay us, and prevent us from going ahead with the project.
In another well-documented speech, Mr. Williams also comes straight out and tells us Canadians that Quebec is using Hydro-Quebec subsidies in order to cheat Canadian taxpayers by producing numbers that would favor them receiving more in transfer payments, which, as we all should know, come directly from the majority Anglophone tax-paying Canadians throughout the rest of Canada.
A recent study by the Montreal Economic Institute indicates that Hydro-Quebec provides a $7 billion annual subsidy to Quebec electricity consumers, resulting in a rate that is less than 40% of Moncton or Halifax or Toronto or Calgary. This is a policy, of course, which provides less income to the government of Quebec, resulting in a greater need for contributions from all of you from the rest of Canada.
He also explains how Quebec is buying power from Ontario at cheap rates and then later selling it back to Ontario at 4 times the price, reaping enormous profits for the province of Quebec on the backs of the province of Ontario and the rest of Canada.
Power as a result of what they've done to tie up the interconnections in Ontario. They actually buy power from Ontario at off-peak times, so they buy it cheap. They store water in their reservoirs, they use that power, and then they sell it back to Ontario for 4 times that price when Ontario needs it in peak times. So, you know, what's going on across the nation as a result of Quebec's market dominance and anti-competitive behavior is sad, and it needs to end.
And if that wasn't enough, I add this second reason as well, which is the apathy and complacency of the Anglophones in general, but in this case, mostly those in Quebec. There are a few very passionate and brave souls, and I give them full credit, that's for sure, but...
And what I found, and I've said that Anglophones I find here have become almost, not all of them, but far too many of them, behave like well-trained house pets.
I further contend that the apathy and complacency of the Anglos in all of the rest of Canada is also why the current Conservative federal government, with its Western leader, doesn't flex its muscle with regard to this issue either. Because they see zero support for them to go out on a limb and take a chance on any initiative. But, by the same token, the people don't take initiative either because they don't see the government doing so. Thus, we end up with the age-old, what came first, the chicken or the egg syndrome. Come on, people. It's bad enough when we don't get the information because the media in this country is all whacked out, but it's even worse when we have an intelligent, respectable politician flat out telling us that we're being duped and we still refuse to see the forest through the trees. What do we need? Huge billboards on the Queensway saying, "Hello people, Quebec and the French are taking you for a ride and using your money to minimize you. Wake up. Time to push back." No, we can't continue this. We can't continue down this path. It's time. It's time to be proud of our heritage, our culture, and our rightful place in this country. It's time we stood together in unity, the majority Anglophones, no longer consenting to the idea that we are to be governed and pushed around by the French minority in this country. No more apathy, no more complacency. We are well past boycotting. It's time.
This country needs to stand up and take notice of what's going on.